Some memories don't soften with time. They calcify in you, like a stone you keep in your pocket and pretend you've forgotten. My name is Henry Mercer, Hank, and I've been a cemetery groundskeeper most of my life. 58 now, but this happened back in late autumn of 2011 in Clay County, West Virginia. I was out there between 1:40 and a little past 3 in the morning because frost makes the soil hold its shape if you tamp it right, and because our day crew had been playing whack-a-mole with a subsiding grave on the old Whitlow family plot from the 1890s. It was one of those nights that sound like a refrigerator humming, a portable generator rattling beside my boots, the headlamp chewing a weak cone of red when I flicked off the brighter beam so I wouldn't ruin my night eyes, diesel on my jeans, clay dust on my tongue. I had a thermos of coffee that tasted like pennies. The fog lay low, not a blanket so much as breath on the ground. If you've worked cemeteries, you know the kind of cold I mean. It finds bone. I set mason's line along the rim to re-square the edges, tied it to steel stakes, and pulled it taut until it sang. There's a crisp note when you pluck that line just right, like a mouth harp. I pressed my palms into the rim, feeling for hollows, and snicked the tamping bar down where the earth had softened. Every few minutes I cranked my little radio, hand crank, the old emergency kind, just to have another sound around me. The overnight stations were supposed to be droning through soft rock, weather loops, and AM preacher if you tuned far enough to the left. Around 2:05, the preacher's voice thinned to static. A woman came through instead. At first, I thought it was a dedication segment on some local station. Then I heard the names. She said them like pearls falling one by one on a napkin. Hiram Whitlow, beloved husband and father. Mary Catherine Whitlow, infant son, Thomas. Not in a rush, a calm eulogy. The kind they don't read at a burial anymore, where someone tries to summarize a life while the lilies still smell alive. I looked down because the names were under my knees. Hiram, Mary Catherine, Thomas. The cold made my breath look like a question mark when I said them out loud. I rolled the dial back and forth, trying to catch a station ID. Nothing. Just the list, with one of those vinyl record hisses underneath, as if she were speaking from water. Okay, I told the air, which is another habit you learn out there. Talking keeps you company, and it feels respectful. Okay. The first odd thing I could pretend away. The second came like a thread starting to move. The mason's line vibrated without me touching it. A tiny shimmer, then a tone, as if a fingernail had plucked it. The stakes gave back a little bell ring that didn't belong to any metal I'd brought. There wasn't wind. This fog just sat. I put a glove to the line to quiet it. It tingled at my fingers, humming like it had a current. Then it was still. I told myself the generator's engine has its own rhythm. It can do that if the idle stumbles just right. I tightened the line again to be sure. My headlamp, back in white mode, glazed the frost on the grass into a field of glass dust. When I stood up to stretch, I saw the shoe prints. They were near my own, similar size, not quite the same tread, and they curved from the rim of the grave off toward the tool shed by the old oak. You can tell when a print is yours. The little wedge by the heel where I'd worn the rubber wrong, the scuff near my little toe from a shovel handle months ago. These were clean, fresh, because the rime was shallow and they went down to the leaf-dark loam in oval pockets. I followed them, because what else do you do at 2:20 in the morning when you're alone and nothing in your life has been supernatural because you refuse to let it be? The prints went as far as the shed's door and stopped. No exit prints. Just a cluster there, like someone had turned perfectly in place. The padlock hung open. I knew damn well I'd left it closed. We had a habit of keeping the old gear separate from our modern stuff. The Whitlow plot had a decorative cradle with a little anchor, tin roses, a cracked portrait oval, 19th century frills. But what I found when I switched my headlamp back to red and opened the shed wasn't decorative. It was an antique safety coffin rig. You've probably heard of those. During cholera scares and mistakes, folks used to fear being buried alive. They'd run a rope from the coffin up through a copper tube to a bell above ground. If you woke up, you rang. Someone would hear. Someone would dig. This kit wasn't installed anywhere on our grounds. We used to show it to school groups as a curiosity. The copper tube had greened at its mouth. The bell, small, with a seam in it you could feel, hung from a bent iron crook. The rope threaded into the tube and out of sight below the floorboards, and the rope was moving. Not a lot. A tremor, like someone on the other end had tapped it with a finger and then folded their hands again. I touched the line and said, "Hiram, you can judge me for that, but that night, names mattered. Saying a name is permission to be careful." The rope stilled. I pulled. It had the give of something snagged on a corner, and then with a little skirl, it slid. I expected soil on it. A damp smell. Maybe the itch of grit in my palm. Instead, it came up clean. White cord. No weight at all. As if it had been coiled under a box, and no one had thought to attach the far end to anything but the idea of a coffin. At my feet, 3 soft sounds lifted through the boards. Tap, tap. Tap wood on wood, or wood on something that remembered wood. My headlamp flared when I lifted it. Battery warnings do that. So I switched it off and stood in the shed doorway. The fog was denser. The generator sputtered and stopped like it had run dry, though I'd half filled it not half an hour before. In the sudden quiet, the cemetery was bigger than it had any right to be. No highway, no coyotes. Even my breath seemed embarrassed to speak. I locked the shed because that was normal, and I walked back. The Whitlow subsidence should have been my problem again. I'd left a shadow of a hollow under the tamped loam, but the ground had leveled itself while I was gone, smoothed to a near-perfect oval. Under the arc of my headlamp, the frost had melted in a clean ellipse. Steam lifted from it the way a horse exhales. You can tell yourself a lot in a cemetery. That heat still comes from sun-stored stone, that groundwater sighs when the temperature tips, that old wood makes old noises. I pressed my palm flat and it was warm, like a cheek. I took my glove off and did it again. The warmth was exactly the width of my hand. When I lifted it, a ghost of my print showed in new condensation, a dampness that whirled and then slipped back into the oval as if drawn from below. "Okay," I said again. Then I pulled the mason's line free, coiled it with more care than usual, left a note for the morning crew that I'd leveled the plot, and carried the generator on my shoulder because the weight felt like proof. Something obeyed me. For the rest of that week, the bell sound followed me where metal ought to have been mute. Not loud, not movie loud. I'd twist the faucet on in my kitchen and hear a glinting chime, like a fingernail tapped from a shallow box. I'd set my keys on the counter and they'd whisper against each other, 3 soft touches in a row, barely there. It was worse when I tried to sleep. There's an attic in my house with tongue and groove boards and an old brass pull on a trap door. The first night, as I settled, the brass gave 3 single notes as if it had cooled fast. Tap, tap, tap. The second night, it waited until I turned my bedside radio to listen for the weather. A woman's voice breathed the names of people I didn't know, and the trap door chimed once like agreement. I haven't checked the attic. I can tell you that straight. I'm a practical man. I fix things I can fix. If something needs me to open a door to prove it's real, it can live with never being proved. Since that night, the only bells I allow are the ones I deny, and the ground is never level when I'm watching. It does that when my back is turned and I let it. I learned that night that sometimes the earth tidies itself only when no one is looking, like a person who wants the room neat but doesn't want to be seen cleaning. Story 2. There are parts of my job I talk about because they make sense on a clipboard. The rest sits in a corner of my chest like a soaked map. My name is Maya Garza. I'm 34. I run a backhoe and pump rigs for a union team, which sounds like construction until you add the words grave relocation, spring flood season, April 2019, Alton, Illinois, river up, sky down, and everything in between slick. We were working a transfer from the floodplain to a new rise the county had cut and compacted 2 miles inland. It happens. The Mississippi takes back what you swear is yours. We had laminated grid sheets with plot numbers and names, a chain of custody folder for every box, a supervisor on a walkie whose battery icon stayed at 1 bar, no matter how often he swapped units. We laid plywood walkways like a board game across muck, and the pumps kicked water from the trenches into a basin where it met itself and sighed. Barge horns moaned off in the fog like animals begging to be foreign. Late afternoon bled into a rain that started fine and turned needled. My boots took water. My gloves stuck to my fingers like skin. The face shield fogged along the top edge when I breathed wrong. I kept my watch under the cuff of my rain jacket because I hate being surprised by how dark it gets when you're bent to a task that wants you to be careful. I noticed the first strange thing because I'm obsessive about marks. On grid B6, as I stepped onto the plywood at the edge of an older plot, my watch stopped. Not slowly. The second hand pinned itself at 12 and stared. I brushed the glass and it began again. Off the board, tick, tick, tick. Back onto it, still, simple as a switch. I stepped off and on 3 times to be certain. 3 times the second hand obeyed the ground instead of me. Condensation is what the supervisor suggested when I told him. He had to lift the walkie to his mouth and shout into it because the rain pinged the tent roofs like pebbles. Electromagnetics, he said after that, in a tone that meant he'd heard someone say it once. Maya, stay on protocol. I did. I checked that our plywood was seated. I verified the posture of the rig's outriggers so the backhoe wouldn't creep. I logged the minute the pump choked so the maintenance note would have a time attached. And right there, with me scribbling under the pump tent's weak lamp, the radio cracked with a voice that did not belong to any adult working that site. Plot B6, plot B7, B8, a child's voice, calm and sing-song. Not the way children play broadcast, but the way they recite a list they've memorized because an adult told them to do it right. I press the transmit because I am not brave unless I can make what frightens me an entry on a record. Say your unit and your name. There was the soft shuffle of rain on canvas, and then nothing. My supervisor came back on and said he hadn't broadcast. No one had. But when I looked at the laminated grid through the plastic sheen of rain, the numbers the child had named matched the next 3 we were slated to move. There's a smell you get used to when you work with old ground. The lilies someone left last week rot sweet, but the old funeral home lilies, the thick-scented ones, they leave a ghost behind that doesn't believe in the calendar. That smell drifted under the diesel and algae and wet plywood as I swung the boom. By then it was full dark. The floodlights were the kind that make your shadow feel like someone else who's equally tired, keeping pace whether you like it or not. We use lifts and straps when we can, always kind, always by the book. The lid on one of the boxes caught light at an angle I didn't like. It had the gloss of condensation. I wiped the back of my glove across it, but there wasn't water on my glove when I lifted it. There were letters, crisp as if someone had stenciled in dew. Don't move me. The moisture was gone. The glove was dry. The letters had been there without having been there. I took a step back. My watch ticked. then froze. Protocol snags your spine when your brain wants to sprint. Chain of custody, grid sheet signature, two-person verification. I called for Elaine to witness the condition of the lid. She squinted and shook her head. "Looks fine," she said. "We're drowning, Maya. Keep it moving." Some people think cemeteries are quiet. They're not. They have the sound a refrigerator would have if it were the size of a field. Humming pumps, water stitching itself back together, the clack of tools. The rain makes a skin on everything. It made one on my face shield even on the inside, which shouldn't happen, and yet every time I lowered my head to see the signature line, the printed letters blurred from condensation that didn't exist when I lifted my head again. We finished the transfer by midnight. The new high ground was a pale strip under a different sky, as if the county had ordered a fresh piece of earth from a catalog and set it on top of the old one. I climbed up to settle the backfill. My boot sank half an inch, then sprang like bread. I put more weight on it. The ground answered, rising and falling in time with my inhale. I took 3 long breaths to be sure I wasn't matching it. In. It rose. Out. It fell. I couldn't make it misbehave, and that made me angry in the quiet way you get when you know you'll sound foolish describing what the body knows it felt. "Elaine," I called. "Come here." She trudged over, her boots making small floods around each print. The ground held still the moment her weight joined mine. We stood there, 2 women in shine-wet rain gear, waiting for dirt to prove it could breathe. It didn't. She tipped her head like she'd misheard a joke. "What, Maya?" I had to pick my words carefully because they go into a thing you can be made to read later. "Nothing," I said. "We're good." We weren't, but saying so wouldn't have added a minute to my life that the river hadn't already claimed. We packed gear. We hung the laminated maps to dry in the equipment shed, the way you hang laundry to get the rain out of Rain's clothing. The pump coughed as it cooled, then clanged once on the chassis like it wanted attention. The fuel cabinet is a steel locker painted the gray of an old bruise. It has a little padlock that sticks, always has. As I reached to spin it open, 3 slow knocks came from inside, measured, patient. I stood very still. I could see the sliver of my reflection in the locker's paint, distorted by beads of rain. The smell of lilies rolled out from the seam where the door met the frame, heavy and sweet enough to make me think of a parlor my grandmother kept like a museum for people who never came. When I opened it, there was nothing but cans and a coil of hose, slick maps sagging on their clips behind me. Nothing shifted, nothing fell. The metal didn't echo anything but its own weight. After the water secedes, you go home. That's the lie we tell. You go home and the river follows, flattened into screens and alerts and little impersonal warnings. A few months later, high heat, night windows open, I woke to my phone buzzing on the nightstand at 12:03 a.m. Weather advisory, it said. River flood warning. The location pin dropped itself on the old plot we'd emptied, its exact center on a map that still showed the river licking its future. I put my thumb on the phone. The alert vanished. I waited for the follow-up. Screenshot window half opened, camera notched like a mouth. Nothing. In the morning, the city's app had no record of an alert in my area. I tried to report the glitch, but the drop-down didn't have a category for things that only happen at night when the pumps are going in your head. My watch keeps time fine now, except when I walk past a certain bend in the levee. Then the second hand stalls for the time it takes me to cross an old distance. I still keep the laminated grid from that job behind my seat in the truck. People think maps help you remember where things go. They don't. Maps remember what we pretend to forget. That's why I don't throw that one away. It's better to carry it where I can feel it press my back than let it find some other route to my hands at midnight. Maps remember what we pretend to forget. If you hold them long enough, the paper warms, and you realize you're the one being traced. Story 3. If I hadn't kept notes, I could tell myself I misremembered, but I wrote it down before sleep had a chance to warp it. My name is Arturo Salgado. Most folks call me Art. I was 46 that summer. Night security at a cemetery in East Los Angeles. Heat wave in July 2006 that made the day feel like a punishment and the night feel like a concession. I'd done time in the Marines back in the 90s. After that, I wanted a job where my voice could be the loudest thing I heard. Cemeteries will give you that if you pay attention. I worked the graveyard shift in the way people mean it as a joke, except for me, it wasn't. 11 to 4, more often 5. The city at night is a different animal. Sirens travel farther, helicopters slur their blades. The freeway hum never stops but gets transparent. Sodium vapor lights turned everything the color of an old bruise. I could taste dust every time I breathed through my mouth. If you've stood near stone after a day of heat, you know the smell. Hot chalk and something like stale bread. Inside the security office, 4 CRT monitors flickered green around the edges, rolled their frames when the air conditioner kicked on, and showed me the world in slow, blue-gray time. We had motion sensors wired to a silent alarm. Nothing dramatic. Just a red LED that winked on the desk panel like an eyelid deciding whether to sleep. I liked to walk the paths at the top of the hour. North fence, past the row of jacarandas that drip purple tears in spring. Loop around the columbarium. Pause by the oldest family mausoleum with its bronze gate and stained nameplate. When it was quiet, I took out a small notebook where I'd copied names I didn't want the grass to swallow. I'd read them out loud, a roll call for people whose days never have to start again. It's something I started as a joke on myself. Marine thing, mail call, but it's stuck. If there's a God, he likes to hear the names said. If there isn't, I do. That night, the heat didn't break. Midnight felt like someone had slid a hot plate under the city and left. Crickets stitched the edges. A cat moved like spilled ink along the wall. Somewhere past the fence, a sprinkler tried to bring a rectangle of lawn back from the dead. The only cold anywhere came from the server rack in the office. The transformers filled that little room with a low, expectant hum that made my teeth click when I swallowed. At 12:17 a.m., the motion alarm for Sector C blinked, then went steady. Sector C was the Hinojosa family mausoleum, sealed for decades, no public access. I had checked its door 10 minutes earlier. Bronze lattice, inner glass pane clean, except for the usual dust, flowers in a plastic vase stiff with faded color. I glanced at the monitor feed. The camera pointed at the door from 6 feet up, always a little overexposed under the light. Something moved behind that glass. Not a person, not with edges that soft. A shape, smudged, catching the light like a reflection of a reflection. The odd thing was the shadow. There wasn't one. Under that light, anything with mass should throw a stain, even if it was slight. The shape gleamed where it should dim and left nothing where it should leave a dark. I tapped the console. The image rolled once with the electronics' tired breath. The red LED held. I spoke to the empty office partly for the log, partly to keep my mouth used to saying things that weren't names. I've got movement at Hinojosa. Going to check. The walk out there is a stretch I know step by step. Concrete in the center, gravel down the margins where water chews. My keys made small, starry sounds on my belt loop. My radio hissed in that intermittent way old radios do when they think someone somewhere could be listening. The night smelled like warmed stone and a fading sugar I couldn't place at first. It took me until I passed the nearest trash bin to realize it was floral powder, like someone's grandmother had patted her cheeks and leaned into the air. At the door, I put my hand on the bronze. The metal had hoarded heat all day and was just now deciding to let go. A gecko peered from a seam and didn't move. I leaned to the glass. The interior was as I'd left it. 2 crypts set into the white marble, one above the other, nameplate shadowed. A little shelf where visitors sit for a minute if they come during daylight and pretend their knees don't tremble. No chairs, no benches. A photograph in an oval frame with its face faded to the ghost of a person. The glass offered me a wavering version of myself. Bald spot, mustache that needs trimming, sweat staining my collar. My breath fogged the lower corner, which annoyed me because it blurred the part I wanted to see clearly. Then the sound came. 3 measured taps from inside. Not loud, not a knock you could mistake for an animal. Wood on stone, maybe, except there's no wood in there. Tap, tap, tap. Patient, as if whoever made the sound had clocked enough years to know you can weight people down if you outlive them. You can say a lot about me, but I don't put my ear to glass I can't explain. I stepped back a half pace and clicked on my flashlight even though the area was bright enough not to need it. The beam skated the pane. For a second it danced white, then a smear appeared on the inside of the glass, high to the right of my eyeline, like a thumb drawn down and in, waxy and precise. A lipstick mark, not a kiss, not the double oval of someone pressing a joke to the world. A single stripe like someone had steadied a finger and then dragged. I felt myself getting mad in that quiet way, because someone could be screwing with me, because the world is easier when there are culprits. But I knew the door had been sealed for longer than I'd worked there. The bronze lattice had fixed screws whose slots were filled with old lacquer, the kind you have to score to make a screwdriver bite. If someone was inside, they were either a ghost or a contortionist locksmith with a thing for long exits. I logged the time in my notebook and took 3 pictures on my cheap flip phone, blurry, useless. Back in the office, the camera showed the glass empty. No smear. The motion LED had died. In the office, the air from the server rack pricked my arms like static. I set the flashlight down, and it rolled into the notch it had made for itself over the years. I woke the interment scheduling computer by jostling the mouse, a relic with a ball you have to clean once a week, green text on a black screen. We used it to enter service dates and placeholder reservations. It was simple enough for the older admin to trust and dumb enough not to crash every time someone sneezed. A new row winked at the bottom of the grid, the way the cursor does when it wants to be noticed. Name, blank. Date, 4/7/2006. Reserved. My birth date, 4 digits that pinned me to the chair. Not the year, my day and month. I stared so long the screensaver almost floated its white squares across. I keyed to delete. The row vanished a half second before my finger went down, like something had leaned ahead of me and swept it away. Heat makes even ordinary sweat feel like a message. It ran along my ribs, and I thought of the lipstick smear and the taps and the smell of powder that lingered in the doorway. I know I'm a big man, but that night my skin felt one size too tight. I paged through the last inputs in case someone had been messing with me. Nothing flagged. The log burped a warning about connection lost at 12:19, which was a common hiccup when the AC blipped. The system clock insisted it was accurate. At 1, I did my rounds again. The Hinojosa door had dulled further, as if a transparent hand had settled there and decided to stay. No more taps. No more movement. I breathed through my nose to keep the glass clear even though my body wanted to gulp air. I took out my notebook and read a few names like you read a prayer you'd like to be misheard as intended for somebody else. Mercedes, Armando, Rosalia, names that sound like bells in the mouth. On the way back, I cut through a row I usually only take during day shifts. Some of the markers there heave in the heat, tilt a little, then settle at night, as if the ground remembers where flat is and slides back into it when no one's looking. The odd part was the way the marble inlaid on one of the benches seemed to shiver like muscle under skin. You know how heat makes a road dance? It was that, but close, under my hand when I steadied myself. I told myself it was the afterimage of the flashlight staining my nerves. I told myself a lot of things that were true enough not to be lies. Back in the office, I noticed the door to the supply closet didn't sit right. It looked closed, but the shadow along the jamb wasn't the narrow one it made when it kissed the frame. I opened it, and a folded cemetery map slipped forward and wedged at the threshold, like a note from someone who'd been trying to push it out. We printed those maps for staff only. A grid, section letters, plot numbers, nothing fancy. This one had an X in pencil over a patch that didn't have any numbers yet. A new slice of earth the city had asked us to prep that fall. I hadn't marked anything there. I hadn't even had a pencil with me that night. Pens, always pens, because ink doesn't blur if your hand sweats. I touched the X because it's hard not to test your own eyes. My fingertip came away faintly pink. Not pencil graphite. Cosmetic. The smell of powder, which should have dissipated by then, bloomed again in that tiny room and then spread until the office felt like a lady's purse emptied into a hot drawer. I don't go looking for ridges in reality. I like my world to be a table with 4 legs, but the lip of my patience was rising. I grabbed the ring of keys and went back out to the Hinojosa door for the 3rd time in an hour, because if I was going to be made a fool of, I wanted it done where my shoes could hear it. The grounds are never flat the way a diagram would have you believe. They have memory. They remember footpaths first. My steps snuck out ahead of me as small crunches. When I reached the mausoleum, I did what I didn't want to do. I put my face to the glass, and I let my breath fog it so I could draw, as if I were a child trying to force a face into a window. On the film I made with myself, I wrote a small question mark with my finger. It felt like a challenge and a treaty at once. I wiped it clean with the corner of my shirt. I checked the screws on the bronze lattice for scratches. Nothing. I glanced at the camera above my head, then at the little metal box where the motion sensor hid and passed judgment on whether presence existed. Art, I said, reminding myself I was me. It's funny what your mouth thinks will help. The air shifted, small but discernible, like when a train passes a long way off. And again the 3 taps came. Tap, tap, tap. Same pace, same patience. The gecko blinked its transparent lid and flattened itself as if it too had been asked to take something seriously. Back in the office, the dance between office and door repeated until the carpet learned my steps. The cool felt violent. I stood over the monitors. The Hinojosa feed showed the door straight on. The glass reflected me and the bronze, that faint halo from the globe above the entrance. Then the smear came back. Not where I'd written, higher, as if another hand had marked its own place and, in marking it, erased mine. Below the smear, in the area where visitors sit during daytime to talk quietly to people who don't answer, there was someone sitting. I know how that sounds. But the camera showed someone where nothing should have been. A figure, smudged, not lit from any angle that made sense, and lit from all of them, as if the glass gathered the light and then loaned it. The figure faced the camera the way you face a mirror when you need to check your mouth for something you're afraid you'll find. There's no chair inside. I've opened that door during supervised maintenance, and there is nowhere to sit except the ground. The figure sat anyway with the posture of a person used to being remembered. Hands probably folded, head not bowed but inclined the way a listener inclines, almost bored with being seen but committed to the performance. I stood there with my hand on the edge of the console and let the breath go out of me until the room took it, cooled it, and I could see it come back in a little white mist. You don't see your breath in Los Angeles in July, not in a room that spent all day baking and has 4 old monitors and a server rack for a space heater. But I saw it. The exhale, the tiny cloud, the instinct in my lungs to make proof. I reached for the phone because that is what training wants. Call someone before you talk yourself out of the part that will be hard to repeat. The phone line clicked once, then the dial tone did a little cough that made my throat mimic it. The Hinojosa feed flickered, a line of static crawling up like ants, and when it cleared, the figure was gone. The smear remained. The red LED for Sector C, which should have been excited the whole time, didn't register a thing. I did a final round at 3 a.m. because habit is a rope you can hold when the floor wants to roll. I locked the west gate even though it had a deadbolt and a chain length that didn't slack for anyone. I whispered a few more names than usual as I walked because I didn't like the taste of my own name after seeing it rounded at the edges in a green, blinking font. I slid the folded map from the closet into my back pocket because I didn't want to leave it where I couldn't see it. The X peered through. If you've ever carried a letter too long in summer, you know the feeling of paper going soft against your thigh. The pencil, or lipstick, or whatever, held. I told myself it was grease-catching cloth. At 3:07, which I remember because my watch face had fogged and dried twice and landed there, the office phone rang one single, clean time, not a ring before a ring, no caller ID blare, a single ring. I reached and it stopped. The display showed the cemetery's office number, the old one we'd had before we switched carriers in 2011, grayed out as if it had been crossed off a list on another screen. I held the receiver anyway, like habit might conjure voice where there wasn't any. No one spoke. But through the plastic, faint as a memory of a room you leave in a dream, I heard something like the wash of an air conditioner on a different circuit. A clink. And then, close enough that I didn't want to say hello into it, a single small sound that might have been breath or a thumb dragging an inch on glass. I put the receiver back because my hand shook and I didn't want to hear the second ring or the third. It didn't ring again, which is worse in a way. The world had the courtesy not to repeat itself. People like endings. Stories teach them that shape. Cemeteries don't have endings. They have maintenance. They have weather. They have names you say until the syllables feel like part of your tongue. I worked out my notice a month later and took another job where the loudest thing was a cash drawer thudding open and close, and the second loudest was my boss sighing through his nose. I didn't stop walking at night, though. You don't lose a habit like that, you just change the fence line. Years have gone since then. On the anniversary of that shift, the one I've told you about from the first step to the last, something simple happens. I go to bed early out of either superstition or concession, haven't decided which. I leave my phone on the kitchen counter and put the landline handset on its cradle like it's some animal that needs the right corner to sleep in. At 3:07 a.m., the phone rings one time. Not loud. Not enough to startle me out of whatever I'm pretending is sleep. A single tone that finds the hollow in my chest and sounds there too. I've checked the caller ID once. It said the cemetery's old office number. Disconnected. I took the battery out for a year after that. It still rang at the right minute. I put the battery back because pretending is its own weight. After the ring, there are 3 soft knocks on my door. Not knocking to be let in, not knocking to be acknowledged. 3 taps. Tap, tap, tap. Measured, patient. Like a person who could wait until the city forgets heat, until the monitors forget to roll, until names forget what breath feels like, and still arrive exactly when they mean to.